Thank you for joining me today. I'm here at the Lounge Bar Learning Hub YouTube channel, and I'm going to be talking through some guitar stuff with you today. I'll start out by letting you know a little bit about me, what I do, what I have done kind of all over the course of my career and music education, and you guys can ask me any questions about that stuff. But then once I start talking to you guys about the things I've got prepared today, I'll play a couple of songs, or maybe a song, and you can let me know if you want to hear another one, because I might be a little rough on it. But the main things I'm going to talk to you guys about today is what I look for and think about when I'm writing a solo, or if I'm listening to a solo, what's going to make me kind of think, okay, this is an awesome solo, like in my eyes. Some of this will be a little bit more towards the music I do, which is primarily metal and some rock stuff as well. So there will be some things that I talk about that, you know, if you're more of a pop player or R&B player or whatever other kind of player, it might not be exactly the kind of thing you would look for in a solo. But I still think a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today are general things that in your lead playing are very important in terms of you being able to get across what it is you're intending to get across with your playing. So yeah, and then to finish off, I'm going to go through a little bit of a technique thing, just something I really enjoy putting in my playing is like some tapping stuff. So I do have some tapping ideas to kind of show you specifically at the end. Other than that, I'll be going through these kind of primary examples of what I think are great for a solo, technique and kind of just listening wise. And other than that, you guys can just ask me questions about anything and I will try to answer as best I can. So a little about me first. My name's Benjamin Ellis, as I said. I started playing guitar when I was 16. I'm going to take this off for a sec because it sounds a bit weird in my headphones. I started playing when I was about 16. I got completely sucked into it as soon as I heard, I think it was like my dad was playing like an Iron Maiden record at home when I was like 15 years old, and I suddenly just needed to know how that stuff worked. And I think it was the lead playing that just got me straight away. So it's always been that kind of like solos have been a big thing for me, really great melody playing. In terms of what I do now, I'm a guitar teacher. It's kind of my day job. I play in a band called Scar Symmetry. So that's kind of like my original music outlet. Prior to that, I was in a band called Bloodshot Dawn, if you guys have heard of us. If any of you are the kind of like local Alton scene for the lounge bar here, you might know of us. So I was in that band for sort of 6 years. We did a couple of albums together, did tours all over the world, really. Lots of stuff around Europe and the UK, of course, but also places like Japan. I do kind of like live recording sessions and stuff, so I can do recording sessions at home. I do live sessions, kind of like filling in if bands need a guitarist. I've done that a few times. I play in a couple of wedding bands as well, so covering some stuff that isn't metal and rock predominantly, a bit more kind of like other styles like funk and R&B and things like that. And let's see, what else do I do? I have to check my notes to see what I do. I think that's the main thing. I mean, just lots and lots of playing all day, every day. So yeah, teaching's the main thing. Also playing a band called Scar Symmetry. Done stuff with Bloodshot. So this is all kind of like original music, heavy metal stuff. And then live sessions for bands who need a guitarist to come in for a gig, kind of like one-off and maybe for a tour. A couple of the bands I've done that for are Onslaught, like a thrash metal, UK-based thrash metal band, and Powerquest, a UK power metal band. And then I'll do also kind of these wedding gigs and stuff. So lots of gigging during the summers, other than this year, of course. So kind of talking of this year, the main thing I've really been doing is lots of solo recording and writing. Lots of kind of like sessions. One thing that I can't actually talk about at the moment because of an NDA, which is actually the primary thing taking up all my time at the moment, other than my teaching. So luckily I've been able to move my teaching to all online during the COVID crisis, and yeah, just doing lots of recording, also for the next Scar Symmetry album. So all of these things I've done, and you guys can ask me any questions relating to these things. If you're interested in any of these things, or you guys kind of like want to get work in any of these fields or anything like that, just shoot any questions to me in the chat here on YouTube, and I will try to answer as best I can. So that's a little bit about what I do, what I have done. So now really it's on to kind of like what things I think are really important in your lead playing, and if you're trying to come up with interesting ideas for melodies or mainly for solos. So I'll play through a few things for this in a moment, but actually maybe before that I will play a song, just so if you guys are here and you don't know who I am and you've never heard me play, I can play a little bit for you. This song, little disclaimer before I play, this is a Scar Symmetry song that I'll be playing in a moment. As of yet, there's nothing this band has released that I have played on, so I can't take credit for the solo in this song that I'll be playing. This was performed, written, recorded by Jonas Kjellgren, the previous guitarist in the band. But this kind of stuff is the kind of thing I like to write and play anyway. So just a little disclaimer there that I haven't written this solo. I can still talk to you about this solo if you have any questions about it, or this song in general. Hey Nanda, how you doing? And yeah, so let me just plug in my guitar. This one is also on a 7-string as well. So most of the stuff I'll go through in a minute when I'm talking about like demonstrating some things technique-wise that I think are important for our solo playing. I'll switch back to a 6-string. For now, I'm using this 7-string guitar, lower tuning for all the heavy metal stuff. So just give me a mo to check the sound here. Make sure I have some volume. There we go. And cool. So this one, I'll get all my excuses out now as well. So I've had a very short amount of time to brush up on these songs. I would have been super on top of them because we would have had a bunch of touring going on this year, but sadly not. So I've tried to brush up on these quickly to show you guys I can actually play a song. So forgive any kind of small errors. I'm kind of relearning in front of you a little bit here. So, but here we go. This one's called Morphogenesis by Scar Symmetry. And yeah, here we go. All right. So that was more for Genesis. And then a quick little clip of what I might play later. So yeah, that's the kind of music I play. If any of you here watching don't know who I am, haven't heard anything I've done before, the kind of stuff I play. So it's very much heavy metal. This particular genre is referred to as melodic death metal. So, which I think is kind of reflected in the sound, right? There's still a lot of like really melodic stuff, all those vocal lines, the solos, the chord progressions, but there's that aggression that you get with metal and death metal, right? So now I'll talk a little bit. I might go back to that solo I played and kind of like pick out some of the stuff in that as examples of what I'm going to talk about, kind of like a demonstration of what the things I'm going to talk about that I think are important for our lead playing. And also, before I do talk about these things, I think I'll try and put them into kind of two categories, where there are some things that I think, despite what genre of music you're playing, what style of music you're playing, that for us as guitarists, if we don't have these things, it's very hard for our solos and our lead playing to sound convincing and to sound good to our ear. There will be a couple of things that kind of like I think stand out as not pleasant sounding things if we don't have these things kind of down. So, and then I'll talk about some other things which I think just expand your solo writing and solo playing toolkit to give you more options. The more options you have, the more you can say with what you're playing. And I think we all want to be able to do that, to say exactly what we want, the way we want with our soloing, and not having to compromise too much because we haven't learned how to do this or how to do that. So hopefully this will give you some ideas about things if you don't know about the things I'm going to talk about, or maybe make you go back and have a little check of these things and see if you can do anything to either improve them or to add them to your toolkit, or just of different ways of kind of thinking about these things. So I'm going to quickly swap over to my 6th string. for this stuff. So excuse me while I do this. Don't want to deafen you guys while I unplug this. So I mean, while I'm doing this, if you guys have any questions already, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I have the chat open, I can see your questions. And I can always talk while I'm doing all this technical stuff. Super technical, plugging a guitar in. Hey Kyle, long time no see, man. How are you? Okay, so should have some sound back again. There we go. Cool. So first thing I'm going to talk about, I mean, basically, if I'm writing a solo or I'm listening to a solo, there's a bunch of things that are going to stand out or be important to my ears. One of them is note choice. And this is actually something I'm not really going to go into too much, because I think this is so subjective, so dependent on the style of music you're playing and just what you want to hear, that I don't think it's really worth me going like, I really like the sound of this, so you guys should do it, because you want to figure out what you like the sound of. You can ask me questions about that, but it's not something I'm going to go into. However, a point to make that it is important. The notes you choose are obviously important as to how your solo is going to sound. But more than that, I'm thinking more about kind of like how we're going to play those notes. So there are a bunch of ways that we can play a note on the guitar. And so this is kind of where I'm going to start with this, is things like, how am I going to play the note I'm playing? Am I going to literally just play it, kind of just pick it and fret it like this? Do I want to bend to that note? Do I want to add vibrato? Because I can't help myself and I have to add vibrato anyway, right? So if I take that vibrato away just so it's a bend, I'll also get rid of any delay and stuff. So it's just, right? But that sounds very different to, get a nice, it's almost like a vocal. If a singer duh is going to that note, duh, there's a little bit of a kind of like you're below the pitch coming up to it, definitely adds something to it, right? And then, so if I'm thinking about bending, if I want to bend a note, I don't have to bend up into that note. I could be in a bend and drop down to that note. That's a really cool sound as well. So again, if I want to play this rather than just this, which might sound cool, but if I want to do something like that, if I start to make it a little more musical and put it into a context of something, right? So if I go, that can sound cool. I mean, I can hardly help myself. I'm already kind of like sliding into those notes and stuff. So I'm going to try and restrain myself and play everything just really straight and add these things in. So if I just have this simple like pentatonic phrase, okay, I could just play all of them just like that. I could just play pick. I could just pick them all, right? But if I want that to sound a little bit more interesting, it sounds fine, but I don't think it sounds particularly exciting or fun. So I'm going to be thinking, this is what I'm doing. If I'm writing something, I'll hear the notes in my head that I want to play, but I'm going to want to make them more exciting than just having the notes there. I want to make those notes sing. I want to make them each have something a little different about them. So if I just have this little phrase again, well, I could bend up to that final note, right? And that's going to sound a little different. I could if I do something like that, having dropping pitch, right? That's going to add something what I'm saying. Vibrato there. I'll go into vibrato in a moment. So with this bending stuff, this is like only the beginning with bending as well, because you can, right now I'm playing diatonically, I'm just playing like a pentatonic thing, but I might be able to get something a little different out of this by maybe not bending from a note that already exists in my scale, or this kind of phrase that I'm playing. I might want my bend to come from somewhere else to give the bend a different kind of vibe. So if I bend up to that final note, I can bend from this previous one up to it, but what if I do that? Now I'm getting like a semitone bend up to that. That's going to have a different sound from bending from a note up a whole tone. Right, so we've also got where we're bending from, and 2 is going to have an effect on these notes. Okay, so I'm aware that what I'm talking about, for a lot of people watching, if you're a guitarist, which I assume you are if you're watching right now, these might sound like, oh, bends, dude, I know about bends. Like, that's super basic. Don't teach me about bends. But I think it's really important to talk about, because this is just thinking about how you can really make each phrase you're playing sing, right? And make it really stand out and have a character to it. So these bends, while we might know about them, it's also another thing that, like, I do see as a very kind of like an instant flag when I'm listening to a solo. If the bends don't sound great, then it's going to let the whole solo down. So you want to make sure with this kind of stuff that you are very confident bending, getting your pitch kind of correct. Okay, so if I try and bend up to that note and I'm not quite reaching it or bending over, that stuff straight away is going to like scream, this person doesn't know exactly what they're doing, or maybe isn't quite nailing what they're attempting here. So we do want to make sure that we have really, really good control of our bending. I think that's one of the really important things if you're going to be playing solos, that you really need to have a good grasp of. So there are a few things you can do to work on that. One is literally just to take a note and pick the note you're going to bend to. You want to get used to being able to bend a semitone, a tone, maybe a tone and a half, maybe even 2 tones. Although as we bend further and further, the tension of the string is going to get more. That can be quite tough on your fingertips, just your hands in general, because of the strength required to do this stuff. But you want to do some practice making sure your pitching is really solid with your bends. I think that's the main thing that lets people down with their bending sometimes, is their pitching. Right, so you can literally go, okay, I'm going to aim for this, and make sure that you can replicate the pitch of that next note that you're looking for, and that you can get there nice and quick as well. So take this stuff slow at first, but you want to build to where you could make it sound almost like you're actually playing those 2 notes. You want to be able to, this is because you want to ultimately have control over how fast your bends also are, because that's another way you can kind of change how your bends sound. Excuse me while I take some water. So I'm going to try and not spend forever talking about bends and go through all of these things and see if you guys have more in-depth questions about them. But kind of with this kind of stuff, I want to make sure my pitching is good and I'm completely in control of that. Also being able to do that, you know, like I say, tone, tone and a half, 2 tones. But another thing about bends that can make your kind of like solos really interesting, and where you can have some real control over how your solo sounds, is the speed with which you bend up to these notes. So this is actually where that tune I just played, Morphogenesis, the solo in that song is a great example, because there are these kind of like kind of like long bends at the beginning where we're bending slowly up to the note, right? So I can say something very different by going and gradually reaching up to my pitch than if I that's like adding a lot of tension in. So I want to think about how I'm using my bends, right? So I could do the same thing if I'm doing the whole like bend from above and down. I could, right? I can control all of that stuff really slow. Oh, Richard Thompson. Play your favorite glorious thing. Oh, okay. I'll have to try and remember it. I will see if I can come back to that a little bit later and play it. So now you have to stick around. But yeah, I'll try and come back to that because I keep writing new stuff every day. I've forgotten that already. Yeah, I'll try and come back to that a little later if I can. Yeah, so moving on from the bending. So if you have more questions about bends, put them in the chat. But you know, that's only one thing, and I don't want to get too hung up on these. I'll try and move faster through these ideas because, again, I also think these are things a lot of you are going to know about already, but I just think it's really important that we kind of think about all the ways in which we can use these techniques to spice up what we're doing in our lead playing, right? So that we don't always bend or always slide or always only pick stuff, that we can kind of like pick and choose and do different stuff within our solos to keep things interesting. So the next thing that I think is a really, really important, almost kind of like essential thing for solo playing in terms of these kind of like basic techniques is slides. So kind of similar to bends, it's giving us like an approach or an exit from a note from either above or below, like changing the pitch, right? So similar to bends, I could slide to that note, okay? And again, I can control that slide at different speeds. There's different kind of like challenges with this stuff depending on how far you're sliding. If I want to have a really slow slide and it's only the note I'm sliding to is 2 frets away, it's going to be tough to do without hearing those notes kind of separate each fret that I'm passing over. But that might be the sound you want. If you're going for a longer slide, some like a further distance, then you can get a little bit more out of it. But a lot of the time, if I'm using slides, I will use these a lot, not just within phrases, but to enter or exit a phrase as well. So rather than going and just pick, and then maybe I've got some slides in there as well, a lot of the time I'm sliding into the notes that I'm starting a phrase with. Not all the time, but it's just a really nice way that you can kind of make the beginning or end of a phrase also more interesting. It's like just a little extra touch that can take a lick from cool to super cool. Okay, so if I play something like that, if I now put that slide on the beginning as well, right, it's just adding a little something. You might be like, oh, well, I prefer it without slide, and that's totally cool. It's just thinking about exactly what you want to hear and kind of expanding what you can hear in your playing and those different options, right? So I might want to do that for a lick, and then the next lick I don't, or I don't the first lick, so that when I do bring it in, it's something that catches your ear. That kind of variety is another thing I'll talk a little bit about in a bit, because that's another really important thing for your solo writing, is making sure you're not doing the same things over and over. So while these might be kind of like cool ideas that we can make some really cool sounding stuff out of, we don't want to go, well, those bends sound super cool, I'm going to do them and then I'm going to do them again in the next lick, and then I'll do them in the next lick, and then I'll do a big bend to finish the solo. We want to kind of mix things up, right? So sliding, we've got those kinds of, you can enter a phrase, right, with slides, but you could also slide up and out, sliding down. I think that the down thing, kind of like a descending sounding slide out of a phrase, is much more common than the slide up, but that might be another reason to use the slide up thing. Makes you sound a little bit different. It's something you don't hear that often. Right, that can sound super cool. Or I can do my kind of slide down thing, right? And obviously, as I'm already doing, kind of using them, connecting notes together and kind of connecting phrases. Right, so I can use these slides as well there. That kind of like last idea would be a bit more of like a legato kind of sliding idea, where I'm now tying multiple notes together with slides where I'm only picking the first note. So that's another way I could use slides, right? Is I could, instead of going, I could slide everything. That's something that I think can make for really interesting ideas and phrases, where it can take something that sounds very, very simple. I think a lot of the time we, like now thinking of metal guitarists, myself obviously included, is like a lot of the time I think we get hung up on, I need to put way more 30-second notes in the solo, there's not enough shredding, it's not enough technical, I need to do all that string skipping and tapping and sweep picking everywhere and everything. It's like, for me, I actually just really love the contrast between stuff like that and simple phrases, but making simple phrases sound more interesting through this stuff, these articulations, right? So if I've got a simple phrase like this thing, but I go, and I can legato slide it all, that sounds a lot more interesting than right. So we can do that with our slides. There's, again, just anything I'm going past here that you're like, oh, I want to know more about that, or is there anything else you can do with that idea, then just let me know. Just ask me a question here. So the next thing that, I think this is the last thing that I think is like, you absolutely have to have this stuff nailed down. And just thinking in terms of the whole nailed down thing, your sliding practice, just before I move on, is just same as your bending, right? You just want to make sure that you're comfortable kind of like doing slides really to as far as you possibly can. Some are going to be super hard. If you want to try and like slide a whole octave, that might be tricky to, but it's doable and can sound super cool. You can slide further than that as well, of course. I think one really important thing with your sliding, if this isn't something you've done very much of yet, because I'm not sure, there might be some of you here who, you know, are beginners or just haven't really done much sliding stuff. Some of you might be like, I know everything about sliding, stop talking about it. But I think the real important thing to get very accurate slides is to make sure that you're putting your eyes where you want to end up for your slide, right? So you want to set up the note that you're going to pick, and then wherever you're going to slide to, especially if you're sliding quite far away, you know, sometimes if I'm going just 5 to 7 or something, my eyes looking at the 7th fret in my kind of peripheral vision is so close by that I don't really need to move where I'm looking. But if I want to slide from the 5th fret to like the 12th fret, if I keep my eyes locked here, oh, I did it, but it's going to be, and that's a bit more muscle memory for me now, is another thing. If you practice it enough, muscle memory will help as well, and you might not have to look, but I would still usually use my eyes to make sure I'm looking exactly where I want to go, just to, even if I feel confident in my muscle memory, have a safety net there that I'm less likely to mess it up and miss the mark. So you want to kind of prepare your note. And as soon as I've got this note kind of like fretted even before I've picked it, as long as I can see, yep, my hand's there, I'm good to go, I'm now going to be looking to where I want to end up for my slide. So when you're practicing this stuff, just make sure that as soon as you're in position here, before you're needing to get to your slide note, you're looking where you want to go. It's kind of crazy how much more accurate you will be, and how your hand just seems to end up exactly where you want it a lot easier just when you're just looking there. Bam, that finger's going to end up there 9 times out of 10. I think unless you're brand new to sliding, if you don't already do this, then this is going to help you a lot more with your accuracy. Okay, so just in terms of if this is something you haven't done, these are the things you want to think about when you're practicing these ideas and trying to incorporate them into your playing. Okay, so the next final kind of thing that I think is absolutely like integral to being a great solo player, although obviously that's still subjective because everyone's going to like different sounding stuff. I do think this is kind of a universal thing that, similar to the bending and your pitching with your bending, if you don't have this down, it kind of makes it very obvious straight away that, you know, it just doesn't sound pro, basically. If you want to sound professional and get like professional kind of like work, get big boy, big time gigs or whatever, then you're going to need these things down at the very least. So this is vibrato. Okay, so vibrato, if you don't know what it is basically kind of manipulating the pitch of your note. Okay, so the pitch is kind of oscillating a little here. We're kind of coming, we've got our pitch that we're kind of, that we want to hear. We want to hear this note, but then adding vibrato is going to make that note sing, right? So again, I know some of you may be like, dude, I know, please. But really, really important that you have this nailed down and that you can play really beautiful sounding vibrato if you want your solos to sound really, really, really good. So if I was going to practice this, a little similar to my bending, I'm essentially doing this kind of bending on a fast rate, like a repeated kind of bend basically going on. I can do more narrow or kind of shallow vibrato or wider vibrato to get different sounds out of it. But the main thing here, and maybe if any of you guys kind of have, guys or girls haven't looked at like bending or vibrato or anything yet, then kind of thumb placement is going to be a big thing as well. So there's going to be some times where I can keep my thumb over the top of the neck to do this kind of stuff, this vibrato stuff, and I'm going to be using essentially this point of my hand here on the bottom of the neck to pivot off, and kind of I'm basically moving, sorry, as I get further away from the mic, moving my hand like this with my thumb still kind of set somewhere. I'm rotating off of this part of my hand, kind of like fixed to the bottom of the neck basically, to get this vibrato happening. A lot of people, when they don't have this great sounding vibrato, are kind of treating it very much the same as a bend, or doing it kind of where they'll bend up and maybe their thumb will be on the back of the neck and they won't have any kind of other connection point from their hand on the neck, which is really important just to give you stability so that you can keep these repetitive motions as consistent as possible, and you're not using all the strength from your hand to try and do it. If we're doing bends where we get our thumb on the back of the neck, which sometimes we're going to need to do, but for the most part we can kind of have our thumb up and this part of our hand connected to give us that stability. If we lose this part of our hand being on the neck, you're relying basically entirely on your finger muscles to do this work for you. So your fingers are holding the tension of the string and then having to try and do very fine movements of kind of like these small up and down movements, which are just going to kill your motion blur productions I will answer that question in a mo. Thank you for that. So this kind of like kind of vibrato thing, if I get rid of that contact point from my hand, I'm now having to do it all from my fingers doing this. And this is basically a recipe, especially when you know, if you haven't been playing super long, or you haven't done much bending, or you just don't do it very often and you're playing at this point, but you want to do more of it. Your fingers are going to hate you after a few seconds, and they're also just going to let you down with your vibrato. It's just, you're going to either lose the pitch you're going for, or really, I'm thinking more about your bends now. If you're kind of bending up and doing it all from the fingers, that's when your fingers start to get tired. But if I can use that point of contact there and kind of push up and kind of pivot with my wrist a little bit and push up with my fingers, then I'm going to be able to maintain that kind of height and that tension, that bend on the string, rather than it all being in my fingers. And it's like, oh, my fingers are getting tired, man. So similar with your vibrato, you want that point of contact here. I think that's like the easiest way to get like a nice consistent vibrato. It's the way that I do it, and I think most people are going to do it instead of having your fingers like this. You may have to do this sometimes depending on where you are on the fretboard and which string you're on, but a lot of the time we can be in a position here where we've got this pivot, and it's going to mean I can just do that pivot, kind of like bending the string a little bit back to my kind of like resting pitch there. Okay, so if I'm here, G string, 7th fret, and I want to add some vibrato, I'm essentially going to be mostly trying to actually target another note that exists rather than a pitch somewhere in between notes is what I tend to do. You can target pitches in between notes and you'll get a slightly different vibe out of it. But I think it usually sounds best if we're actually thinking about kind of, just like with our bends, targeting another pitch. And if I've done my bending practice, right, I can target that pitch, drop back down, and then I'm just trying to do it at a consistent rate. And if I'm starting out just for the first time trying to work on my vibrato, this is what I would be doing, and this is what I did when I was trying to get a nice kind of vibrato technique. Bending to that next note and back, and I'm trying to do it in time. 1 and 2 and 3, right? So having a metronome actually playing can be really good for this when you're first starting out, or if you're just trying to refine it. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Right, my metronome's just clicking away, and I'm trying for each beat to be resting, pitch, bending, resting, bending. And I want that pitch accuracy to be good and the rate to be good. Then I can start getting a little bit faster, and you'll get to a point here where the kind of the separation between your bent note and your resting note starts to disappear, starts to blur, and that's when you get from the sound of like bending now becoming more vibrato stuff, right? So once you can get that nice and fast, you can start to alter the rate at which you do this to change kind of how that note sounds, the effect that that vibrato has. Right, so I could have a slow vibrato like this. It's going to sound very different from a more kind of like wild, fast vibrato. Right, so there I'm doing what I would consider like a normal kind of vibrato. It's not pitch shifting too far away from the note I'm resting on, and it's also not too close to the note I'm resting on. I'm essentially targeting sort of a semitone away at this point. But if I was going to do a wider vibrato, it's going to have another different kind of sound. It's another thing that if I want my note to sound a little bit more kind of like wild and that kind of like 80s vibrato, is I'm going to be maybe targeting like a tone away would be a good place to start. Okay, so my pitch isn't necessarily always going to be like a perfect tone away from the note I'm going to, or a perfect semitone away, but this is where you want to start to basically get your bending and vibrato bending as accurate as possible, once you're used to being able to consistently hit a particular pitch and come back, you can experiment with how far, like how much tension you're applying in your hand to maybe go a little bit less. So if I start off and I'm doing my either semitone vibrato or my, I'm trying to get that wilder vibrato, right? Then after that, I might just start going, okay, well, I'm going to go a little bit less than that semitone. And now, hopefully, from doing that practice, my hand is now kind of attuned to or sensitive enough to the pressure I'm applying to the string that I could apply a bit less and consistently apply that same amount of pressure over and over. And do that kind of like nice and quick. However, this also leads on to the point of like something about vibrato that I think rarely sounds very nice, which is fast vibrato that is less than a semitone away from your note, where I think this is where it sounds like a little bit too shallow and like shrill. If I'm not quite, and I'm doing vibrato like this fast and I'm not bending as far as that, if I'm going like a little bit, that's like when it's a dying B or whatever, you know, it's just, it doesn't sound very nice. But if you can just add a little extra, then it still sounds really cool at higher speeds, right? So how fast you use your vibrato is going to change how that note sounds. How wide your vibrato is going to change how that note sounds. You could always start to combine those things. I don't think I really do that very much, but actually that might be a cool thing to do. It's like if I started off with like a really wide vibrato and I slowly decreased that pressure I'm applying to the strings. Right, that note can go, it's almost like a dynamic thing. It can go from my note being like, kind of comes down to somewhere a little calmer sounding, and that can give me a little bit of a crescendo literally in a single note, all just from applying this vibrato and changing how wide I'm going, right? So, yeah, vibrato is just another thing I think is super, super important if your solos are going to sound great, because if your vibrato is not in control and right, oh man, no. If too shallow is not going to sound great, and if your pitch accuracy is inconsistent, that's just please, just that stuff super, super important. So those three things: bending, sliding, vibrato. I think in order to make your solos have some really great character and sound more interesting than just playing the notes, those are the three main things I would want to have control of. So before I go on to anything else, Motion Blur Productions, you asked about any tips for pinch harmonics and like guitar squeals. So this is actually one of the things I was going to talk about in this kind of like other things I think you want to have in your kind of like playing toolkit, technique toolkit, to just have more options for how you're going to make a note sound. There are other things I might touch on as well, like phrasing and articulation, which we're getting a little bit more into how we string multiple notes together. And I guess we've touched on that a little bit with like the legato sliding thing, right? So squeals or like pinch harmonics are another thing that I really like to be able to put in a solo for like dramatic effect. So for any of you that might not know what pinch harmonics are, also known as kind of like guitar squeals and stuff, this is where I'll actually talk about just harmonics in general for a second after I take a quick sip. So basically a pinch harmonic, we've got these harmonics available on all of our strings in different spots, pretty much everywhere on the string. The way that we create these harmonics is if we're fretting a note, just holding our finger down on the string, applying that pressure so that we're fretting a note so that we can hear it. That would be a fretted note. But if I could also play a harmonic and get sound out of the string where I'm basically lightly touching the string and picking. I want to remove my finger fairly quickly after that harmonic has happened. Otherwise, if I keep my finger there, I'm going to choose a different place where maybe it won't ring out quite so much. Okay, I'm still doing it. But if I keep that finger down, you can see how the note gets cut off, right? So that note stops sustaining a lot faster if I keep my finger down, because now my finger's interrupting the string and its vibration. So if I'm playing like a harmonic there, but I keep that finger on the string too long, I'm going to kill the sustain a little bit. But if I see that, it's going to go on for a long time, and unless my noise gate kicks in and gets rid of it, it's going to go on for quite a while. So these harmonics, we're just lightly touching the string, and we can find these harmonics lots of different harmonics in lots of different places across each string, right? So there's just my E string, sixth string, right? If you've ever heard that sound in a song, that's what's happening. It's just natural harmonics just lightly touching the string and moving across it so that you're hearing all of the harmonics come out. That's an awesome sound. And we'll get to the pinch harmonics in a second. Basically, these harmonics, right, are created by lightly touching the string. So I'm not quite fretting, but I'm just barely touching the string, just enough that I can feel it under my fingers, and then picking the string to create that note. So these natural harmonics, they have like a really nice kind of chimey, bell-like sound. But then if we use pinch harmonics, where essentially what we're doing is we're trying to create a harmonic from a note that is already fretted, right? So these natural harmonics, they're being played without me fretting any notes. They're happening off of an open string, and I'm playing these harmonics somewhere. For a pinch harmonic, I essentially want to try and create one of these harmonics, but for a note that already exists in my fretting hand. I could try and do that by maybe like tapping the string with my other hand to do that same kind of thing that I've just been doing just now with this hand instead, and that would be called a tapped harmonic, because we're essentially tapping the string with our other hand. Pinch harmonics kind of take it a step further and start giving you the option to actually use your fretting hand. And this is a little bit of a tricky technique. I remember when I first kind of really noticed pinch harmonics, and let me just show you how it sounds. Right, it's these kinds of things. So you can hear where that like guitar squeal kind of name comes from. You can also fluff them real easy and get some horrible sounding stuff if you don't do it right, but you can get all of these kinds of sounds out of your guitar using this technique of pinch harmonics. So basically what I'm doing to create that is it's allowing me to create a harmonic off of a fretted note, like I say, instead of having to do it from an open string where I'm not necessarily going to be able to play every single pitch that's available to me. I'm going to be limited to what's there. So now if I want a specific pitch, I might need to fret somewhere so that I can then get a harmonic off of that. This pinch technique is called such because you're using your guitar pick, and let me know if, I know because my webcam isn't the best, you might not be able to see this, and it's kind of like a real fine detail thing. I can always, I do this for guitar lessons, kneel up on my desk and just get the guitar closer to the camera. I might even just do that in a moment. I'm basically trying to get my pick on the string that I'm fretting and I want to hear this pinch harmonic from, and as I pick the string, I'm pushing into the strings with my hands so that the side of my thumb is going to connect with the string, basically at the same time that I'm now releasing the pick from the string. So I'll get on the desk in a moment and get closer to the camera, but I'm basically picking into the string, but angling my hand a little more like this, or just digging in a bit more aggressively. It's a little bit of kind of angling my hand in this way, where you could think about kind of lifting from the little finger side of your hand, lifting up to be angled in more. So if you look at my thumb while I'm doing this, as I bring my hand up, you can see my thumb, right? It comes in more to the strings. I want my thumb to get into the strings so that my thumb can act as that part of my hand that's creating a harmonic. So the difference here is that we're having to pick and do the harmonic with the same part of the same hand. You know, we're picking with a pick held between our thumb and our index finger, but we're now trying to use our thumb also to create this harmonic. So the sound of a pinch harmonic is about kind of getting those things happening at the same time, where basically as I pick, I'm angling just before my pick leaves the string so that my thumb grazes the string as I leave, creating that harmonic. And remember, we don't want to sit on the string too long, or the harmonic's going to be choked and just disappear. The sustain won't be there, right? So you can hear that, right? You kind of start hearing the note and then it's gone. And that's just because I haven't left the strings as soon as I've kind of formed that harmonic, right? So this takes a little bit of time, and it's absolutely fine if you are trying to get used to this idea. Start off just doing that kind of like creating the harmonic, but it being choked. If you can still hear that kind of high note, right? Do you like my singing? If I can at least hear that I'm getting that crazy, wild, like high-pitched sound, right, then I know I'm starting to form that harmonic. And sorry, getting distracted by the next question. Let me have a look. I'll come back to this. What are your favorite exercises for syncing left and right hand for speed? Okay, Lee, I will come back to you in a mo. So if I can at least hear that note begin, I know I'm getting the right kind of approach with my thumb, right? If you're not hearing that yet, you need to work on that angle first, making sure that you can get some connection from your thumb on the string. Then if you really feel like, pay attention to, can I feel anything on my thumb? So you want to not only be thinking about, like, what note am I holding here and am I picking the string? You actually want to consciously be thinking about, can I feel the string kind of like tickle my thumb, basically? Because as you pick and then turn, you should feel a light kind of like tickle against your finger as the vibrating string is basically vibrating against your thumb for a second. So if we can make sure, yeah, I'm feeling that string under my thumb, so I'm definitely approaching the string in the right way. Hey, Jimmy, how you doing? I'm well, thanks. Hope you are too as well, man. If we do this kind of like, I can hear the notes coming. I can feel that I can feel the string against my thumb. If the note isn't yet happening, that high-pitched harmonic we're looking for, now we need to potentially change where we are on the string, like how far up or down the string we are. We don't really want to get anywhere over the neck for this kind of stuff. We can get quite close to the neck, but over the neck, I'm not really going to do that. There are some harmonics you could get there, but you might as well tap them, and it's just going to be super difficult to do it there, basically. Most of the time, you can just get the same harmonics that you can get here somewhere else on the string that's more easily accessible and in a more normal place for your picking hand to be. So now, if I'm kind of... Let me try and find a spot where... Okay, so maybe I'm like here, right? And I'm starting to feel the string under my thumb, but the note that's coming out either sounds like a little bit weird. You can hear that one has like some weird like artifacting, almost like noise in it. If I'm like, okay, well, I want to try and get that really pure harmonic sound. Now if I start moving my hand a little bit, I'm going to start finding the spots on the guitar, and you'll have to, you know, through muscle memory and taking a look, see where you are, feel where you are with your hand position, start figuring out where those strong areas are going to be. This will change a little bit as we change this as well, because we're essentially, by fretting the note, shortening the length of the string and changing where those harmonics are going to appear on the string. So, you know, find your favorite spots and just remember where they are. That's what I tend to do, is kind of like, I've got a few favorite pinches I might really like. The really high pitched stuff here around fourth fret on the G. For some reason, that's just the one I always go to. It must have been in a Children of Bodom song or something, because this is where I first was like, what the hell is this sound? It's amazing. I need to know how to do it. And trying to figure out how this worked. Like I started saying earlier, I was watching videos of people playing this, and because this is such a fine detail thing, and it doesn't really look like I'm doing anything different to picking normally, right? That it's like the tiniest difference. You wouldn't really tell unless you knew what this was, how it was happening. And I used to sit there watching videos, just going like, right, there's the note. He's not doing anything different. How does this work? So it's really difficult to kind of spot this unless you know how it works or someone tells you. So hopefully this is helpful right now. My tips basically for it are that you spend a little bit of time just making sure that as you're picking and kind of digging into the string and getting that thumb to connect, that you're thinking about your thumb. How does my thumb feel? Can I feel that tickling that I need to feel on the side of my thumb that's going to tell me I have connected to the string with my thumb and not just the pick? And then from there, once you're getting those notes to happen, you need to get used to, as soon as you're feeling that happen on your thumb, that you're away from the string straight away. So you don't need to come away like this. I'm just doing that so that it's, you know, an exaggerated example of, you need to get that hand out of the way, that thumb out of the way, pick out of the way, don't be touching the string anymore, basically. But you can do that as easily as just, my pick is now out from the string just a centimeter or two. As long as I'm not touching it, I've now got that harmonic ringing out. Right, so you can get different harmonics depending on where you are on the string, and depending on kind of like what I'm fretting with my left hand. I know some of this stuff sounds horrendous when you don't hit it properly, and even when you do hit it properly, because it's just super high pitched notes. So sorry if some of this is also horrible to listen to. But yeah, so then basically, like, really the thing that makes these sound super cool, in my opinion, for soloing at least, is I don't think there are maybe some times where I would use these pinch harmonics in a way where I'm not also adding vibrato, but rarely. Most of the time, if I'm using pinch harmonics in soloing, it's so that I can really make like a particular note just like really like scream at you in a cool way, not in a disturbing, horrible way. Right, so I basically want to add that vibrato as well, is usually what I'm going to be doing. So I'm getting that thumbs touching the string just like at the same time basically as the pick is now leaving the string. I'm letting go of the string as soon as I can feel that like little tickle on the side of my thumb. And the more you do this and practice this, the more it will become a thing you just don't even have to think about. You subconsciously just register, yeah, I just felt that happen, and you're away from the string and that harmonic's happening now. Then you want to be adding that vibrato, which if you've done some work on it, is going to sound really nice and consistent, and your pinch harmonic's going to sound nice for it. Right, then we want to add that kind of like vibrato to it. Hopefully that helps. Motion blur. If there's anything else I can do to help you with that, you know, if you're like, that doesn't make sense, dude, please help, just put another comment in there, and I will try to go back over this if I have time. So yeah, there's some other kind of things we can look at for our solo playing, but first I'll try and address your question, Lee. So my favorite exercises for syncing left and right hand for speed. I've definitely done a bunch of kind of like creating exercises and playing exercises to work on stuff like speed. I'm kind of assuming you might be talking a little bit about, if you're talking about the sync between left and right hand, you're maybe talking about like for alternate picking specifically, or like economy picking as well, rather than legato stuff. So I think like for me, alternate picking is one of the harder things to get like super good with, because it's just physically very demanding and difficult. I don't tend to use too many exercises, and to be honest, it's something where like I could probably use some work with it, but just because I find it so difficult to do amazingly, there's other stuff I know that I really like in my own playing. I kind of focus on things like tapping and just all this stuff I'm talking about a lot more, and like arpeggio stuff rather than the. That being said, I do still use it because it sounds really cool. It's just one of the harder things to do. So I've got some exercises that like I have for students. I think mainly for me is I'll either, basically I want to figure out where is it that I'm tripping up with my synchronization. A lot of the time, if we're doing kind of like 3-note per string stuff, like please feel free to put any more info about the kind of music you like to play and the context in which you're talking about the stuff being used. So because I'm just going to be going off like, well, I'm a metal player, this is how I use it. You might be looking at this a slightly different way, or with different kind of like note groupings on strings. I'm going to be thinking a little bit of like the 3-note per string shreddy stuff that us metalers often try to do, because it does facilitate slightly easier kind of alternate picking than having maybe 3 notes on one string, then 2, then 2, then 3 again, or whatever it might be. So if I'm thinking about that kind of 3-note per string alternate picking like speed stuff, if I'm doing something like that and I want to try and kind of like improve it, if I feel like I'm kind of like struggling somewhere, I want to figure out firstly what's the moment that things go wrong. Most of the time that tends to be when we have to change a string, but it can also be, you know, if our left hand or our right hand just isn't quite as fast as the other, or just isn't quite playing at the same speed. So I mean, first thing, start slow, right? If it's just the coordination between your left and right isn't quite there yet, and that once you get to higher speeds, I mean, ultimately everyone's going to have a threshold where you reach a certain speed and your picking might be going like brrr, but your left hand's going brrr, but slightly out, because it's super difficult to get that all in time. I would basically start off first checking if that's cool. If I could go, or maybe even, you know, I try to stay away from the stuff that literally just sounds like exercises, and find examples of the kind of stuff I want to do more in like other solos I really like, figure out how to play them and then use them as exercises, because then at least I'm psyched about the exercise I'm doing. Definitely in metal, come from more of a jazz background and struggling with super fast lines in metal, especially in something groups of 5 and 7s. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I mean, you're going to have different challenges with different note groupings and stuff. So if we're doing the notes, I should have been able to probably read that from like an autocorrect thing, but I couldn't, especially in note groups of 5 and 7s. Okay, cool. So yeah, I think the main thing is, you know, if you feel like your hands general synchronization is fine, what you want to look at is just like, where in these phrases that I'm struggling with, am I kind of like falling behind a little bit, or what's the moment where it kind of goes wrong? So slowing down can help to zoom in on these bits to just see where you start feeling a little uncomfortable or whether you lose any time at those moments. But you know, as you slow down, your accuracy is probably going to go up. Trying to kind of like look at your playing when it's really fast but not quite working can be difficult to analyze because it's so fast it's hard to see where it goes wrong. So that's when I would probably film myself playing as well, because then at the very least I could upload it to my own YouTube channel and keep it on private so no one can see me messing up my picking, but then I can use like the slowdown function and I can like listen in a little more closely, and just try and really pick out where it is that I'm kind of falling behind. I do tend to use songs and solos I know more as a practice tool rather than the exercises, just because a lot of the time the exercises aren't necessarily going to be something I'm really ever going to try to incorporate into my solos, or they might just sound very kind of like non-musical and boring sometimes. I do have some exercises though, so if you want to send me a message, or like you can send me a message on Facebook, I'll kind of do those little notes and plugs now, I guess. It's like if you search Benjamin Ellis Music on Facebook, you should find my page. I'll actually put links in the chat towards the end as well, just so that you can go straight there. If you want to send me a DM or anything and ask me, you know, for some specific exercises, I might have some stuff I can send over to you. No worries, dude. I'll try and explain a little bit more as well, maybe, just because this feels like quite generic to me, but it's tough. This kind of stuff, you know, if we did have a lesson or something, you wanted to hook up and actually talk about it in person, I'd be able to see exactly where you're struggling. That's the big thing with this stuff, I think, is like, at first you've got to analyze, well, where is it that I'm struggling? Because the likelihood is that you're not like failing to play every note. It's just there's a particular point where you're like going to be losing a bit of timing. Like I say, quite possibly when those string changes come in, and when you've got like groups of 5 and 7 and stuff, you don't have like with even numbered groups of notes, your pick is going to go down, up, and be back in its down position, right? When you get to the beginning of that next phrase, 5 and 7, your picking's going to be reversing at the beginning of those phrases. If you're doing like consistent 5s and 7s, or even if you're just going 5 or 7 and then into even playing, your picking's going to end up flipped around from where you started. So it's kind of, figuring out where you've got an issue is the first thing, and then making a point of kind of like just focusing on that one bit. So if, for example, I'm trying to do something in like a group of 5, like right, one thing I might do is not alternate pick it, because like I said, alternate picking is really tough, especially if our picking's like turning around. I might be able to use something like economy picking there, which would help me more. So if I'm actually finding like that easier if I start on like an upstroke. Down. So here I'm basically, just as an example, I'm on the B string, 10, 12, 13, then 10, 12 on this high E string. And what I might do is I might kind of start off with downstrokes, start off with a downstroke, down, up, down, up. But I think as soon as I get to that upstroke, the thing that I at least fall into, and you know, this could be seen as a bad habit, if I'm wanting to alternate pick this for that consistent kind of pick attack, if I have to economy pick it, but I want to alternate pick it, then I need to work on making sure I can alternate pick it. But if I'm just trying to make sure I can play this in time, economy picking might feel easier, and I might be like, that's cool. I'm happy with that sound. I like that sound. So here, the economy picking thing, if I'm down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up on that final note, once I've gone through the second time, because I've finished on an upstroke, I could now upstroke into the beginning, and I'm essentially playing the same way I did at the beginning of that second time. So I'm going like down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, and getting another upstroke there. Down, up, and now I can just do it where it all feels the same each time. There's different challenges if you're doing economy versus alternate, obviously, but that's another thing that you could consider is, could I potentially just pick this thing that I'm struggling with in a completely different way that might actually facilitate me doing that a little more easily? So I hope some of that helps. Do get in touch with me on Facebook. Benjamin Ellis Music should be my artist page. I'll also post a link to my personal page here. Don't spam me, guys, or anything, but please do feel free to spam me with questions. So if you've got any questions about any of this stuff later, any of you, if you don't really want to talk about it here more in public and you would rather do this, just a one-on-one kind of discussion, that's absolutely fine as well. You can send me just a private message and I'll try and help out. I might have some exercises I can send you. So yeah, hopefully some of that helped. So getting back into some of these techniques that I would consider like for my solo playing is, so we talked about like harmonics and pinch harmonics. I like to have those. That I don't think they're essential. If you don't have a solo without a pinch harmonic in it, it's not going to sound bad. It's just another thing that if you know how to do them, you can add them to your solo if you want to. Whereas I do think like, you don't always have to put a bend in your solo. You don't always have to put a slide in your solo. I do kind of feel like you have to put vibrato in your solo. But that's me. And I think I just think it makes it so much more like lyrical and closer to the human voice to kind of have that there. And it adds excitement to notes which otherwise just hearing the static pitches just don't sound so cool. But these other things, they're a little bit more kind of like, extra stuff you can add. So we talked about harmonics and pinches. The other thing was going to be like how you pick if you're picking. And I think we just touched on that a little bit, is like, well, I could alternate pick everything and then I'm going to get a very consistent pick attack. I could legato play that instead, right? So instead of picking, you get a slightly smoother sound, especially if you want to do something like all that kind of stuff where you're just moving around rather than and getting like the pick attack on all of that stuff. You can get a more fluid kind of sound if you use legato playing, right? So legato playing, for anyone, if you don't know what legato playing is, it's basically where you're going to play the first, at least most of the time, it's going to be the first note in your phrase on one string you're going to pick so that you can create that initial vibration of the string, create that volume. And then everything else is going to be created just by placing our fingers, fretting the string without picking those subsequent notes. So I'm picking the first and then doing what's called a hammer-on, where I'm kind of hammering my finger down onto the string to create the note, kind of like piggybacking off the vibration that's already in the string because I've picked it. If I don't get those fingers down fast enough, it's going to do kind of what I was talking about with our harmonics, where my finger's going to touch the string but not fret it and add that pressure quickly enough. And that light touching of the string is going to kill the note before I can kind of create it without a pick there. So, that would be if I picked and then tried to hammer on, but I didn't hammer on fast or hard enough. It's going to mute the string before I've created that note. I need to get that finger down with a little bit of force and speed so that I'm kind of like taking over from that last note. So this would be legato playing, as if you're kind of and then you can get into legato stuff where, you know, I'm like basically not picking the strings anymore at all, and then you get that really nice kind of like fluid sound. So that would be another thing that I would really want to have in my toolkit for my playing. Not essential, or not as essential as, you know, the vibrato thing, I think, is like the big one. And then having good control. It's more about having control over these things than like you have to put all of these things in every solo you ever do for it to be good. It's like you just, if you're going to use these things, you want to have a certain level of control over them so that they're going to sound good when you employ them in your solo. And then I just like to have all these things available so that I can make my solo go anywhere I want it to, kind of, you know, within my limitations. I can still kind of like do as much as I want to, and this is all in the interest of like having as wide a vocabulary and being able to kind of like use notes in different ways. You know, we've only got 12 notes here. It's like we want to be able to make them all sound a little bit different and a little bit, you know, add some contrast to our playing and stuff. So let me have a little look through my notes about other things I think are important. So I'll come back maybe to some more techniques in a moment. If there are any other questions, let me have a quick look in case I've missed anything, but I think I've answered everything so far. If there are any more questions about anything I've talked about or anything I haven't talked about, and just general questions you have, please do put them in here. I think we've got like 35 minutes left or so. Like I say, you can always message me privately after as well on Facebook, or my website as well, benjaminellismusic.com. I will put all of these, I'll say these all again at the end, but just those places you can contact me just in private if you'd rather. There are a few more technique things I might go into a minute. I'm not going to go as in depth because there's another thing at the end that I'd like to be able to go through with you guys, just because it's kind of fun. I think it sounds cool. It might be more of a new idea than this stuff because, you know, I think most of you here, or all of you here, are going to be guitarists and you probably know about a lot of these things already, but I just think it's really important still to talk about them. But yeah, hopefully we can get into this other thing in a mo, like some tapping stuff that I think is really cool, some ideas you might not have had yet in ways that you can use tapping if you use it at all, or even if you don't. But before that, I actually just want to say, in regards to like solos and writing a good solo, I think it's often overlooked that, I mean, at least I really feel that you can't write a great solo unless you have a pretty great part to play over. I think you can write a great solo over an okay kind of like rhythm idea or like chord progression, or, you know, whatever's happening underneath where your solo is meant to go. Your solo can really improve that section, but if you have a section that doesn't sound very good, you're going to be very hard pressed to make your solo sound cool. This is something that, like, in my experience, just kind of like from my own writing, from kind of like doing sessions for other people and guest solos for other people and things like that, I often feel like when I kind of like have a track to work on from someone else, or when I've struggled to write a solo on my own material, it's because it almost feels like the solo section has maybe just had less attention than the rest of the song, because maybe there's a bit of a preconception that, well, there's going to be a solo here and the solo is going to sound sick. The solo is going to make this sound cool, but you will be very hard pressed to make your solo sound good. And I don't find much about playing more frustrating than trying to write an awesome solo, and I never want to write a solo that doesn't sound really cool and really excite me and sound the way I think, you know, I want what I write and play to sound like something I would like to listen to. So I really hate having to feel like I'm really fighting against the section that I'm playing over, because it just feels like it either doesn't have like a strong sense of direction, or just feels like it was thrown together a little bit, or there's just not much interesting going on. And it's maybe that, you know, I think I was totally guilty of this like when I started writing music was just like, cool, well, I'll put a solo here, so here's a riff, and just like that's it. But your solo is going to sound so much cooler if you really work on the music underneath it being interesting to listen to without a solo even being on it. I really like to do that in my own music, where the stuff I'm writing that's going to have a solo over it sounds really awesome on its own, so that even if I didn't have a solo, I'd be pumped to listen to that piece of music. So just a really important thing, I think your solo is really only going to sound as good as what it is you're playing over. So do think about, you know, if you're writing all of the music you're soloing over, if you're writing what is going to be supporting your solo, put time and thought into, you know, what kind of solo do I actually want to have in this song at this point? I need to come up with an idea that's going to enable that type of solo to happen. So if I want like a really fast ready solo that's going to like amp up the energy in the song, I probably don't want to go to a really slow like halftime groove with not like, you know, just quarter notes on the cymbals and stuff, and it's just like a really kind of like sludgy section, and then I'm like, let's put a shredding solo in this. The section itself probably isn't going to support that vibe. And if you're like, I want this solo to like have a really dark kind of vibe to it, this stuff might sound obvious, but you want to think, well, what chords or mode or scale is going to facilitate that sound I want happening? And then you want to think about like how the rhythm's going to like drive that section. You might want the section to be sparse and open to let the solo do all the talking, and that's totally cool, but do that stuff with intention. I think having some intention before you even do your solo as to what kind of solo you're going to want to have there. Think about that when you're writing the part that's going to go underneath it. I think it's maybe an overlooked thing about solos. I feel like all the solos I'm proudest of and like of my own work are written over sections that as soon as I kind of like either wrote it or was sent it and asked to like write a solo over it, I was just like, this section sounds so cool. I'm like, the ideas are just happening straight away in my head, right? Those are the best solos when I can hear the solo ideas just in my head as soon as I listen to the piece of music, rather than going, okay, what am I going to do for this solo? Like, you kind of want those things to be happening just in your mind. So yeah, make sure you write an interesting section for your solo, something that inspires ideas for your solo. So let me have a quick little look. Any other techniques? So just a quick like overview of techniques I tend to use in most of my soloing. These again are kind of some of the things where I don't think they're absolutely essential. They don't have to be in every solo, but they're things that expand my toolkit and sounds that I really like. So that's things like tapping, maybe some sweep picking. I tend to do sweep picking stuff now, less of the kind of like metal thing, the cliche metal thing, I should say, or like maybe the slightly outdated metal thing of kind of like taking big 5-string sweep arpeggios and going all this kind of stuff. Like if I'm using sweep picking, I tend to use that stuff now with like 3-string shapes a lot of the time to facilitate some of these kind of like faster runs. I like that kind of sound a little bit more, and I can work that in to like a phrase or something. But like sweep picking, that's another thing that if you're a metal guitarist, I think you want to know and understand at least a little bit. I'm not going to go into those things because I think they, similar to kind of like the synchronizing your hands question from earlier, it's the kind of thing where, you know, there's plenty of videos out there telling you how to do it, but if you would like any advice from me on how to do it, it's going to be a million times easier, or just, you know, it's really going to work if I can have some FaceTime with you and see where it is you're struggling or want any guidance or advice on. But these kinds of things are other things that I'll be thinking about for my solos. Not necessarily every time, but they're tools I know I can use to add certain sounds to my soloing. And I think we talked about pretty much everything else. There's also like whammy bar stuff, which for a long time I haven't really done. If you guys don't know what that is, it's basically, I've got a guitar behind me. You'll have seen guitars where, and I'll grab it in a moment, but where there's like a metal arm here. Let me grab it so that I can actually demonstrate it quickly. While I'm faffing around, please ask me some more questions if you have any. So while I'm getting this guitar ready, the 6th string I was using just a moment ago. Well, it's the same as on here. I have a sock tied around the end of the guitar, which if any of you are like, what's that stuff hanging off the end of his guitars? It's like, I basically, if I was a little tidier or more worried about my presentation, then I would buy a fret wrap, which does the same kind of thing as this. Basically, this up here, a lovely clean sock tied around the top of the guitar. This is just dampening any sound that might happen above the nut on the guitar with the strings up top, right? So I'd need to, well, let me show you. So if I've got this guitar, you can hear all that kind of like clanky, there's no tuning to it kind of noise from the top of the guitar. It's mainly for if I'm recording, because if I'm doing something like some really stop-starty riff stuff or like some staccato things, even like palm muting or even solos and stuff, is those strings will resonate, they'll vibrate sympathetically on the other side of the nut if I'm playing these strings, right? So if I did something like, I'm like playing hard and then I mute, I'm going to mute, but these strings are still going to carry on ringing out. So to get like the cleanest recording sound, this up here is just going to stop that from happening. And then the other thing that I can use this for, usually when recording, I don't really do this if I'm playing live because there's too much to think about and I just want to think about playing the part, and I'm just going to try and use other techniques to keep my playing as clean as possible. But if I'm recording, for the easiest way to just get super clean takes and not have maybe an otherwise perfect take ruined by me accidentally slightly brushing a string I'm not going to be playing and hearing some string noise, I can also bring this down here, and then when I'm playing, and I'm going to need to plug this guitar in now, is when I'm playing, if I do accidentally hit a string I don't mean to, or there's some string noise going on, that's going to cancel it out, or at least catch most of it and keep my takes and my performances a little cleaner. So quick little demonstration of the whammy bar thing. And let me mute this or it might sound horrible. So the whammy bar thing, like the last kind of thing, I haven't really done this much until recently because this wonderful guitar, which was like the first really high-end, awesome, super exciting guitar I ever bought myself, so lots of sentimental value there, is I haven't had it set up for ages just because it's 6 string. I usually use 7s now for most of the music I do. But for a recent project, the project I'm spending most of my time on now, like I really wanted to try and get some of this whammy bar stuff going again. Finally got this guy set up. And basically this whammy bar stuff is if you have a floating bridge on your guitar. So you'll know if you do, because you'll have this tremolo arm or whammy bar here, as it's also called. And basically I can use this to make some pretty crazy pitch bends happen with my guitar. So this is another way, kind of like thinking of bending again, that I could also bend, is I could use the whammy bar instead, and I'm going to get a slightly different sound. Harder to be accurate with, and I'm not going to be accurate with it because I've basically just been using it for the fun stuff recently, which is dive bombs and crazy harmonic squeals and stuff. So let me show you some of the whammy bar stuff that is another thing I just know I have in my toolkit, if I have a guitar that can do it, that I can add to my solos to make them more interesting. And there's a few different cool things you can do with a whammy bar. So let me just get rid of that guy. So now with a whammy bar, I could turn my amp on. I can basically manipulate the pitch of my strings both down and up. You'll get some bridges where you could only pitch things down, but if you get a fully floating bridge, you can also pitch it up. So you can get some pretty crazy sounds out of it, and maybe I could, you know, if I want to leave or enter a phrase now, like I was talking about, kind of sliding into stuff or out of stuff, or bending into things or out of things, I could now use this. This is a different way I could bend. I can also add vibrato with it. But it's more these kinds of things that are really kind of like unique to it, is where I can get these really crazy kind of pitch manipulation sounds, where there I'm basically just hitting the bar a little bit and getting the pitch to kind of like drop or raise very quickly and straight back to the note. So it's kind of like quicker and just smoother than if I was trying to do that with my fingers. It has a different kind of sound, but just because of how rapid it kind of comes back to the note. Right, or I could, that's the coolest thing. That's my favorite thing, is just being able to do what's usually known as a flutter, where because of how this works, a whammy bar works, just a brief, crude explanation of it is I've got my bridge through to the other side of the guitar. There are springs attached to this bridge, screwed into the guitar further up. So these springs are attached both to the guitar, the inner guitar, the wood of the guitar, and to the bridge, to create a tension between them that then you can kind of like tune your guitar up, and it will stay at whatever tension you set it to. It can be a bit fiddly setting it up, but after that you have that tension, that kind of like normal tension maintained by the springs, and you can now manipulate it a lot with the bar. And so with the bar, what I can do is I can actually get this kind of like flutter thing where the springs are essentially going to like be pulled. They're going to go back and kind of like do this a little before they get back to their full tension. So rather than kind of like the springs stretching out and then just going back to where they were, it's a little bit of kind of like back and then doing a little bit of like a rattle, and it gets you this kind of sound. Turn the volume on. So if you combine that with like harmonics and stuff, that's when you can get some really cool sounding stuff. Right, so that's just another thing that I know I could use if I want to. Definitely not essential for solo playing. Sometimes it can be detrimental to your solo if you do that stuff too much. But that can be a really fun thing, and it's kind of like, I guess, the last other thing in terms of these kind of like different techniques for different ways I could play like a single note, right? So I could bend, I could slide, I can add vibrato, I can do the whammy bar stuff, I can pinch harmonic those notes, I can play a harmonic note. Then you start getting more into like the technical things of like how you play a stream of notes. So legato and your sweep picking, alternate picking, economy picking, the different ways I could then play, a group of notes, which I'm not going to worry about going into too much. Now I'm going to try and quickly butcher a little tapping lick idea and just start to have a little look at kind of like what's going on with it quickly before we have to finish up. If you have any questions, though, they're more important for these last 15 minutes. So please do let me know in the comments real quick if you have any questions you want to run by me before we have to call it a day. So yeah, add any questions you have real quick in the comments and I will try and answer them before we have to finish up. Otherwise, I'm now going to put this back and grab the other guitar again and quickly go through this little tapping idea. All right. Okay, so let's get that volume back one more time. Okay, cool. So this little tapping idea, I probably won't play perfectly, and I will. This is something that I like a clip. It's basically an exercise idea that still sounds nice and musical. And it's kind of an example of how I would often use these tapping shapes, which look like this. Like that, how I would use them either within a solo, or this exercise is basically to get you used to using these shapes, but then also tying them together to move around the fretboard and move throughout whatever harmony you're trying to play or create. And yes, this is like an exercise I wrote, I don't know when, but for quite a few years I've used this with students who are interested in these kind of tapping ideas or just advancing their tapping capabilities. And I posted this on Instagram, this lick that I'm going to take you through, and I'll try and find a link and post that in the comments so that you can watch me play it better there, because I'm probably going to scuff some of this. But as long as you get the kind of concept of these shapes, I think these can be really, really fun to use and spice up your soloing, or just kind of like, yeah, bring them into your toolkit as other like arpeggios you can use and stuff. So basically this idea kind of goes like this. And then you can add a spicy chord on the end. But basically these shapes, I just think these shapes can sound really, really cool and sound different to a lot of kind of like solo ideas. They have like nice big interval jumps in them, which can sound can really catch your ear as a listener listening to solos. They're also really cool in that you may have noticed that while I was playing that, my left hand is jumping around a lot and playing a lot of big shapes, and my right hand, for the most part, is staying in exactly the same spot. So you can make use of these shapes if you kind of know some of these shapes. And I'm quickly just going to go through them. I ended up waffling on a lot more about the other stuff than I thought I would, but that's not a bad thing. They are super important. And I'm glad I got to answer some of your questions as well. Thank you for asking them. These shapes, if I start off with this first shape, let's just try, because we've got like 10 minutes or so, let's just try to kind of go through the core idea with this tapping kind of like shape. So I'm trying to find something that I can loop around over the course of like a bar or half a bar, or to tapping exercise IG vid. Hell yeah. So these shapes, basically, if I forget the right hand for a second, what I'm doing with my left hand is actually playing kind of like a broken, not just in linear order, like root, third, fifth, seventh kind of thing, but I'm playing some different 7 arpeggios, like 7th chord arpeggios, basically. This first shape, if I think just about my left hand, I'm playing like an E major 7. So I've got E here, I've got my third, major third, I've got the major 7, back to the root again. Here's my 5th. Like if I got the 5th there, and then I have the 7th again on top, so I'm going like root, major 3rd, major 7, root, 5th, and the 7th again. Then my right hand can extend that idea a little further. But if I mean, even if I just know that this idea is a major 7. This is something that I could now use this shape in a bunch of different ways. Right, I could use that, or I could not shred around with it and just, you know, I can break that up a little bit and just go, well, I now know that I can play some major 7 stuff here in this kind of shape. But then my right hand, the great thing about using these and then tapping is now I could potentially extend the chord even further to get a slightly more complex sound out of it. Just change the sound in whatever direction it is I want to go with the sound. And I will often use these ideas where I will basically start out with one arpeggio like this. I'm quite used to these shapes now because as soon as I discovered them or kind of like figured out this kind of thing, I was like, that's a cool sound. I'm going to use that all the time. So what my right hand can do now, because I'm doing this with tapping in this particular instance, is I can now extend the chords further if I want to further complicate the sound, but in a nice way, if I want to make that sound a little kind of like deeper and richer harmonically. So I know these notes I've got here in my left hand. Now with my right hand, I can figure out if I want to spell a particular chord, I can think, okay, well, let's try and target those notes. But in this particular case, right, this, I've got my root in the 1st, so I've got my 5th there, so I'm tapping the 5th, still getting like an E major 7 chord sound at this point. This, I've now got the 3rd again. Right, I'm just tapping an octave of the 3rd. But then this hand up top, I'm going to end up tapping the 9th here. So I kind of, this note, essentially, with my right hand, I've gone from playing, and I'm actually, so that it's not all crunchy, let's go for a clean tone for a moment. That's nicer. So now instead of just a major 7, which sounds cool, and I may want to just play a major 7 with this tapping, but if I want to do something a little different, I can do that with whatever I'm doing in my right hand. So in this case, I'm now, this arpeggio goes from sounding kind of like outlining this, with that note on top, I'm now getting a little bit more of a slightly more complex kind of harmony sound out of it. And these shapes, I love them so much because it allows me to do this with very little effort. It's not to say that it doesn't take a lot of time in the beginning, kind of like getting used to these shapes. There is a lot that these kind of require, a lot of attention that these require to get down. But I mean, I think I've put a fair amount of time into like most of the technique stuff that I use. So whether that's alternate picking or legato or tapping or whatever. And in comparison to like alternate picking stuff that does the same kind of thing as this, I personally find that the tapping thing is ultimately like a relatively easy thing in the basic technique. You can go far with it and make it really complicated, which is what happens kind of at the end of this example. If you guys are interested in this, by the way, I have a tab for this. Just get in touch with me after the lesson and I can hook you up with the tab for this. And I'll also put that link to the Instagram thing so that you can watch it and familiarize yourself a little with the sound to see, you know, instead of just one listen and going, maybe that's cool, you can have a listen a few more times and maybe you'll go, that is cool, or I don't care about this. And then you can decide whether you want the tab. You can get in touch with me and I can just send that over to you. Or always give you a lesson to break it down a little bit more. I think the tricky stuff with this is the muting that you need to do, not getting string noise between everything. So if I now try and go for something maybe a little more gainy, if I now try and forget all the muting, you're gonna, right, as I leave a string, it's just ringing out open over what I'm now trying to do next and just muddying it and making it sound bad. So the muting thing is going to be a big part of this. So for the muting, basically, I'm trying not to leave the string with too much of this, kind of like leaving the string with a big jump like that, where I might like kind of like pull the string by accident is not going to be what I want. So I'm trying to be relatively gentle about leaving the strings with my left hand. But the big thing is my right hand and getting used to being able to basically cover up with the right hand. It is cool. Thanks, Jimmy. I'm really happy to help. So my right hand basically is doing virtually all of the kind of like muting quality control for a lick like this. This takes some time to get used to because you need to basically work it into your muscle memory. It's not something you want to be consciously having to think about while playing this. There's enough going on with the notes and the shapes, as much as I'm saying like, oh, I find this stuff fairly easy. I mean that in terms of compared to alternate picking and compared to sweep picking and some of the other things that I think fall into the same kind of bracket with this, the more challenging technical stuff you can do on guitar. I find that tapping is one of the easier ways, if not the easiest way, to get cool, flashy, interesting sounding stuff out of your guitar without it destroying your brain, right? So my right hand for this muting is basically trying to so let's try and run through this super quick before we have to finish. All the things I need to think about with my tapping. So I'm actually going to talk about the muting in a second. The first thing, left hand. This is a place where I don't want my thumb up here. That's going to completely restrict the range of my left hand to maximize the span I can get out of this hand. And these shapes, this first one and some of the later ones more so, are quite a wide stretch. So I do understand that while I'm saying like I think tapping is relatively easy in the grand scheme of difficult guitar techniques, this is one of the more advanced ways that you can use it because we're using big stretches, we're string skipping, we need really good muting control. But in terms of just tapping, I think that kind of stuff sounds pretty cool, right? With relatively little difficulty once you understand the principle of it. So if you don't understand the principle of tapping at all and don't know how it works, get in touch. We can potentially, you know, sort of lesson out, run through that stuff with you and clear it up. But this, so now if I run through everything I'm thinking about when I'm doing this more advanced string skipping, wide stretch tapping stuff, is left hand. My thumb is going to need to be at least in the middle of the back of the neck here, possibly a little further down into the bottom half of the neck, right? So if I try and flip this over a little, my thumb is going to be positioned roughly here. Okay, so it might get a little bit further down like this, but I'm not really going to be coming up any higher than the middle point at the back of the neck, because that's going to start restricting the span I get in my hands. As I go further up like this, I'm essentially closing my hand together like this. And if I have my hand like this, I can't do anything with these fingers. But if I have my thumb out and away here on the back, I can make the span of my hand as wide as I'm physically capable of doing. So that's the first thing. Now the tapping hand. One big thing about tapping in general, this is something that if you don't already do it with your tapping, I would really recommend you check out, because I find this made a huge difference once I started doing it. A lot of kind of like people first starting out with tapping, when I'm first teaching this, people will go in for tapping. I'm like, right, cool, we're going to either use our index finger or our middle finger. I personally recommend the middle. I just find that one's a little stronger and easier to use. You might get into advanced stuff where you want to use all of your fingers on your right hand. But I tend to use my middle. Index is fine as well. But the main thing is, like, people will start off going, okay, well, I'm starting to get used to the tapping thing. I can do that tap, but the tapping, right, absolutely fine. The thing that we're lacking is like stability for our hand. I'm currently having to use muscles in my wrist and my forearm, potentially my elbow as well can get strained from doing this stuff. I'm trying to maintain the height of my hand and that attack onto the strings, all with the muscles in my arm, and that's going to be taxing for my arm. I can reduce the stress and the taxing nature of doing this with no stability for my hand by adding some stability by taking my thumb and putting it on the neck, or on the guitar body, just having something that's going to take a little bit of the weight, a little bit of the pressure that the rest of your arm is under, trying to actually get your finger to touch the strings. We want to try and get like this where possible. It's not always going to be possible to be on top of the neck. I have a guitar where you can see the neck set in here. I do have a little bit of the neck actually sticking up over the body here, so I can do that. That might not be the case with everyone's guitar. But I want to basically have a point of contact for my thumb that's going to help reduce that stress for my hand. And I can now... It also means that the angle at which I'm doing my tapping should stay fairly consistent. Then the last thing I'm going to talk about, because I'm running over time, is I'm going to use my right hand to also mute the string that I've just finished playing on and just tapped on as I move to the next one. This, I think, is the trickiest part. This is basically what you want to do with this is maybe go, okay, the first note on the second string that I'm going to be using, this note here, what I want to try and do is, as I get to that note, I'm going to start rolling my hand over, my right hand, again, using my thumb. So also is pretty important if you're going to be able to execute this muting. With my thumb, I can now just start allowing my right hand to roll further over onto the strings, so that while I'm tapping with my middle finger or my index finger, I can make use of this whole part of my hand to gradually roll further over onto like the little finger side of my hand and mute the strings that I no longer want to hear anything from. So what I would do to get used to that, because I think it's like the hardest thing to get used to in this technique, or it's something you really need to get it sounding nice and clean, is I'm actually going to just, maybe before I even grab that note, get used to pivoting a little off of my thumb and maybe even that tapping finger I've just used, just rolling just enough and having the base of my hand kind of touching the string a little, that the base of my hand's going to roll over just enough so that I now stop that string I was playing from ringing out anymore. Right, so I'm just rolling over a little and now my hand can mute that string. Now I want to check that I'm not rolling over too much. Because if I go to tap this and I'm blocking that as well, I need to have gone a little less distance with my roll. So you want to just get used to rolling over to mute the string you've just played, but not so far that you're going to mute whatever the next string you're going to play is. So that's even more, exaggerated if we were going to play something that was on the very next string, right? So just get used to that idea of try and do a bit of tapping here and then roll slowly at first, just until that disappears. That's like the most efficient, perfect amount that you could roll, and you should have all the other strings underneath clear for you to go. I'm sorry, I've run a little bit over time and can't kind of go into this bit as in depth as I might have. But hopefully some of the stuff I've talked about has been useful to you guys, has been new to you guys, isn't just stuff that you already feel like. I know all this stuff, dude. Keep it down. So yeah, hopefully it's been useful. If you have any other questions at this point, I would just say go to my Facebook page, which Catherine, is it smart if I just put these in the chat right now? Is that the best idea? Great to see you too, Jimmy. Thanks for tuning in. Need to catch up sometime soon. So yeah, I'm going to quickly just hop on Facebook and post a couple of links for you guys. You can either get in touch with me at my personal Facebook page or my artist page, or at my website, especially if you want to kind of book a lesson, anything, going to my website is going to be a good one, because the form is just nice and easy, comes straight through to me. So let me just grab all those links. While I am still here posting these links, if you do have any last minute questions, just pop them in real quick. I can always, DM you back if there's not enough time to chat about it quickly now. But so just going to post a link to my website. So other than these links as well to where you can find me personally and ask more about guitar and anything about kind of guitar lessons or anything, in terms of other things you can check out from me, like I said at the beginning, I play in a band called Scar Symmetry. You can check us out if you don't already know us. We will have a long-awaited album coming out next year, all things well and good. It's been a long time and people are pretty mad at us at this point that it's not out already, but it is basically done now. So fingers crossed that will be out very soon. And if you like the song I played earlier, that's the kind of stuff you can expect from that. I'm also working on a solo record at the moment, which I hope to have out in the first quarter of next year if I possibly can. That's also been a long time coming, but with other work, especially this year, taking on so much kind of recording work and stuff, it's just taking me much longer than I would like. But if you like any of my playing from today, do check out my website I've just posted. I will post a quick link to my Facebook pages. So here is my personal page, and then my artist page as well, NMO. But yeah, you can also check out my playing is on the first two albums of the band Bloodshot Dawn as well. You can check them out. The first album was self-titled. The second album is Demons. You can hear my soloing all over that stuff. I'm not on the latest record, but they have an amazing guitarist, Morgan Reed, in the band, whose solos are insane. So you should check that stuff out if you're interested in any of this soloing stuff, because he has a ton of stuff to offer as well. But yeah, you can check those bands out. Hit me up on Facebook, at my website. And yeah, I think that's everything. So I'm literally just going to post my kind of artist page, and then that's it from me, unless there's any other questions waiting, which I don't think there are. So there you go, there's the last link. But yeah, thank you guys for tuning in and sticking with me. I hope some of the stuff has been useful to you guys and it's been interesting. Hit me up if you have any more questions at the links provided. And thank you so much to Catherine for putting on all these awesome educational videos for us in these streams. There are loads I've actually already kind of like dipped into a little, and I'll be going back and watching all the stuff that happened today that I didn't watch because I was too busy panicking about this one for myself. But yeah, check out some of the other streams as well if you're interested in, you know, making a career out of music or have a career in music already. Everyone that's been talking has had like a bunch of really great advice on all manner of stuff about working in the industry. So yeah, highly recommend, and thanks so much for having me and putting these on.